Are we ready to garden? I was going to go out and try some milkweeds by stomping them into the snow, which is, Coral might talk about that, but anyway, so where I was going to plant them, I went out and looked, the snow's still 3 feet deep, so I decided I'll wait a little bit. If you haven't been here before, this is the only seed library in the state that we know of. We know there are other libraries and organizations in the state of South Dakota that are interested in getting one started, but so far, we're still the one and only.
The Vermilion City Library does have a seed library, but I don't think they're an active group.
Okay.
You can get seeds there.
Okay.
Yep.
You know, I just took a workshop last Saturday. It's an all-day workshop on seed libraries. And they are so different all across the nation and how they do things. So with ours, in order to get the seeds, you have to attend the classes. So, okay. One thing I do want to point out to you is that we are going to be having a Master Gardener training, and it will be in Yankton. There will be 2 live sessions. The rest will be online. If you are interested in becoming a Master Gardener, we have sheets here that you can pick up, and it gives you some of the information, but it also gives you a website that you can go to for more information and to be able to register for that class. The first live session is going to be held the end of March, and then it goes all summer long, and I think the ending date is July. So usually they're once a week online. There's reading material to do in between and so on. But the deadline to register is March 10th. So I have these right here if you are interested in taking Master Gardener training. I'm getting a folder. Okay. And then we will have the Yankton Seed Library brochure, which is hot off the press. So you can pick one of those up on your way out. It gives all our topics and our classes for the rest of the year. So today we're going to start off with Coral Huber, who is a Missouri Valley Master Gardener, and she's going to talk to you about landscaping with native plants.
Hi, welcome everybody, and thanks for coming out on this dreadful day. Hopefully we get out of here before this works. So I am a newbie Master Gardener. I was in the class of 2020, I think. So I'm new to all this, so please bear with me as I stumble through this. A few years ago, I kind of became obsessed with landscaping with native plants, and so I'm no expert in this, and I'm kind of going to share with you my journey and all of the things I have learned so far. I've watched, I can't quite say hundreds of hours of webinars from all kinds of groups all over the country, but I've watched a lot of hours. I've read a lot of books. I brought my book collection with me. It's on the table over there if you want to peruse some of those, just to get an idea of some books you might want to look at. We've also asked the library to purchase those, some of them electronically, some of them hard copy, so hopefully the library will have them in at some point. So that being said, I'll talk you through my journey. So before I started native landscaping, I had very little insect life in my yard, and now I've got swallowtails like crazy, and we've got the sulfur beetles that have come in, and just all kinds of things I can't identify. So one of the new things that I am now starting to learn about is all the beneficial insects and birds and all the things that are coming into my garden now that I have these native plants. So that piece I'm still learning about. I don't know a lot about it. I just know that growing native plants is good. So I'm going to do it. And I'm going to convert pretty much my entire yard to native plants, besides my vegetable garden. I have to have my vegetable garden because really I'm a vegetable gardener at heart. So, so what is a native plant? There's lots of definitions out there. You can look at it in multiple different ways, but most of the definitions sound much like this. There are species that occurred naturally in a particular area, and they were here they were present prior to European settlement. So pick whichever definition you like, it doesn't matter. Just know that native plants were here before settlement. So now I want to talk a little bit, before I get into like how do you do this, I want to talk a little bit about the advantages of native plants and why you want to incorporate native plants into your landscaping. You're going to save time and money because you're not buying fertilizer, you're not putting gas in the lawnmower. And you know, our native plants have evolved with local growing conditions, so they don't need a lot of input. And so I just love this little cartoon. It's like, why are we growing lawn if we can't eat it? Or something can't eat it. So native plants are excellent for improving water quality because we're not putting those additional inputs into our yard or on turf grass. Native plants don't need inputs. Those chemicals aren't getting into our stormwater and running into our water system. So they help with improved water quality. They also help with stormwater management. So prairie plants have extensive root systems that permeate down into the ground, allowing more water to penetrate and more water to actually stay in the ground versus running off and running into our sewer systems. So here's just an example, and I know it's kind of hard to see, but over on your left, we've got a Kentucky bluegrass, and that root system is 4 inches, compared to our native switchgrass, which their root systems can go 10 feet into the ground. So imagine how much more water can infiltrate and then stay in the ground. So they're incredible for that. The next advantage is carbon sequestration. So actually, the temperate grasslands in North America are the 3rd largest store of carbon. And then the 3rd behind the boreal forest and our temperate forest. Temperate grasslands are better than temperate forests that's storing carbon because their biomass is below ground, and if there were a fire, that carbon isn't released when it burns because it's underground. So great for carbon sequestration. And then probably why you all are interested in gardening with natives is to support our native fauna, because native fauna are really important for us, for us to sustain life. They're important and they provide ecosystem services, which are basically services and goods that humans receive because of the things that the native fauna are doing. So there are pollinators, and they can be natural enemies, pest enemies in the garden. So I'm just going to throw up a couple of studies here. So the Michigan State had a study where they looked at how having native plants in your yard actually attracted more beneficial insects, and that had a better benefit than using conventional methods of pest control in your garden. So, and you know, this is anecdotal. Sitting out in my garden, and I watched a little finch, I don't even know what bird it is, a little embarrassing, fly into my broccoli, pull out a cabbage worm, and fly away. And I was thinking, yay! Thanks for the help, buddy. So we definitely want native plants to attract those natural garden enemies. Our native bees are actually really efficient pollinators. They're actually, a study has shown that they're actually more efficient pollinators than the honeybees, especially the bumblebees, just because of the way they actually attract pollen to them and then carry it away. So they are more efficient than our honeybees. Still need all the bees. Don't have anything against the honeybees. And with that additional pollination come health benefits. There was a study that Harvard did that found that when there's less pollination, it removes healthy food from our ecosystems, leading to increased disease in humans. So there's health benefits to gardening with native plants. All right, any questions on any of this? I'm gonna stop along the way a couple of times. And there are sources on each of these pages. I have a resource sheet that I can email to everybody, and we also printed a couple of paper copies just in case people like paper. They are web links, so it is kind of easier to get it electronically, but if you want that, we can get that to you. All right, so I think this cartoon is funny too. Great, we're attracting bees to our yard, but there's nothing to eat. So if you put it, a bee hotel in, you have to also provide food for them. And so I love this quote from Doug Talama. Probably heard his name a few times in this talk. In the past, we have asked one thing of our gardens, that they be pretty. Now they have to support life, sequester carbon, feed pollinators, and manage wildlife. So we've had tremendous amount of habitat loss across the country. And now Doug Talama is the dreamt up the idea of homegrown national park. And the idea is that we all plant these pollinator gardens, these native gardens in our yards to help bring that diversity back up. So, and you can, I don't know if I have Homegrown National Park reference on my sheet, but I should have. Anyway, Google Homegrown National Park, tremendous, tremendous site. All right, now we're gonna get into it. We're gonna start talking about planning your native plant community. So I have this giant yard. I moved to this place 4.5 years ago. I went from a teeny tiny little postage stamp of a yard that had mostly natives in it. Back then I had no clue what I was doing. When I got to this point, I have some clue, but I am working on eradicating all of this turf grass because who wants to spend their Saturdays mowing? Not me, not my husband either. So places you can start in your yard is by removing invasive plants. So I had this lily of the valley, which is poisonous to dogs, so I had to get rid of it anyway. So I took that out and replaced that with natives. So start with removing those invasive species. Another garden that I've created is a shade garden under a tree. Unfortunately, this shade garden is under a maple tree, and I've been told time and time again it's impossible to establish plants under a maple tree. I'm still going to try because I am very stubborn. And I wanted that lawn dead. And worst case scenario, I cut down the maple tree and plant an oak. That maybe be happy with me. Another thing you can do is increase the depth of your foundation planting. So a lot of us have those typical foundation plantings around our houses, and increase them from 3 feet to 10 feet. And you can create a beautiful garden there. Now I'm showing you all of these pictures of what is happening at my house, and they're not very pretty because A, I'm bad at taking pictures, and B, this is my first year on most of these gardens, so they're not that interesting yet. So another thing you can do is just rethink the front lawn. This is not my yard. Someday this will be my yard. I will be converting most of that front yard area into a native planting. This picture is actually from Jim and Sherry Stewart in Sioux City. They're members of the Wild Ones, the West Coast Wild Ones group. And this is their yard, and they won Yard of the Year in Sioux City last year. So this is becoming more and more accepted. So for somebody to win Yard of the Year in their yard is native plants, that's pretty awesome. So we can do this. Another thing you can do is create a layered forest edge for privacy. So I have a corner lot, got a picket fence. I want to create some privacy in my yard. So I'm growing some natives, some cultivars, that was a mistake. Anyway, so you can create hedgerows for privacy. And then finally, you can remove hardscape. So I've got that entire boulevard, that picture up in the right corner is an entire boulevard, or half a boulevard covered in rock, and I tore all that rock out. And it was incredibly labor intensive. I tore out that retaining wall, and then I sloped it using a shovel. Did I mention I'm a glutton for punishment? You can hire people to do this stuff for you, but you don't have that money. So remove hardscapes, get rid of that stuff that's impermeable. This had plastic underneath it, so nothing was going into the ground. Complete waste of land, in my opinion. So just a few ideas on where you can start in your own yard. Once you've got your site selected or cleared out, you're going to want to, before you pick your plants, you're going to want to consider your site considerations. And this is something we all think about as gardeners, no matter what we're planting, natives, cultivars, vegetables, doesn't matter. You want to understand the soil moisture, the soil type, the light availability, your slope and aspect. And when you're planting native, soil type isn't as important. Natives don't care how crappy your ground is. They're going to grow. Unless, of course, it's something that really likes to grow in rock or something really coarse, and it's not going to do well. But that's really the only consideration that you need when thinking about soil. Oh, sand is another one. So something that says it like sand, don't plant it in loam. It's not going to do well. So now that we understand, we've evaluated our site conditions, we can move on to picking our plants. And something in landscaping, and especially native landscaping, you may hear is the right plant in the right place. You want to match your plant to your site condition. And I can attest to this being true because I've done a lot of bad things in my yard, the things where they didn't belong and they got out of control. They didn't, or they didn't grow very well. But again, you want to match your plant. So the size, height, and spacing, you don't want to put an 8-foot tall plant. There are 8-foot tall prairie plants. In a boulevard, that is only 6 feet wide. That would just look silly. You want to consider, match your water and drainage needs for your plants to your site conditions. And then a couple other things you want to think about is your bloom color and time, and then your UNC hardiness zone. And these are all things that you can get from a standard nursery site on a nursery website. That's a picture I took out of the Prairie, and that's just some information from Prairie Moon website. So these are like the standard things we normally think about. There's also other things that you want to consider that we don't typically think about, and that's the reproductive. One is the reproductive habit of that plant. This particular plant, common name, blue mist flower, it spreads by seed, and it is very, very aggressive. If you want this flower in your yard, great, you can plant it. Make sure it has lots of competition and it can't self-seed. Otherwise, it'll take over an area. Maybe you want it to take over an area. That's great too. But understanding those reproductive habits is really important. Generally, there are clumpers, so the nice clumping grasses, things that self-seed. There's things that reproduce by runners and rhizomes that will spread throughout a planting. So those are things to look for. You want to understand the lifespan. So I know that Black-eyed Susan is a very popular native plant and cultivar, and it is actually a biennial, sometimes considered an annual depending on the area. But what that plant does is when you plant it, say in a seeded mix, that plant is going to grow first. That's one of the first plants that's going to grow. It's a colonizer, if you will. And it's going to come in, it's going to kind of stabilize the site, and then it's going to go away. If other plants have come in, there's enough competition, that plant may potentially disappear off of your landscape because that's its job. Partridge pea is another one of those. I've heard some say that Monarda fistulosa is that way as well, but I have not had that experience with bee balm or wild bergamot. So understand the lifespan of that plant. My sister was talking to me one day and she's like, oh, that's one of those plants that it grows in one place one year and then it grows in another place the next year. And she's like, it walks around. I'm like, that's not what's happening, but close. And understand that, plants are going to move around in your native plants, in your native planting. Another thing to consider is management needs of some of these plants. So some plants just don't like competition. This again, cardinal flower is another one of those plants that is an early successional plant. It's going to come in, colonize a place, stabilize it, disappear from the landscape because it doesn't like competition. So that's a term you can look for when you're reading about plant descriptions. If it doesn't like competition, you can keep it in your native landscaping if you want, but you're going to have to manage for it. You're going to have to keep the mulch off of it because it doesn't like its rosettes to be covered. And you're going to want to make sure that there's bare ground so it can self-seed for the next year. So you can have these things that are a little more difficult. They just require a little more management. One thing I should have said earlier is that native landscaping isn't no maintenance. A lot of people think that, but it is low maintenance and you can make it high maintenance if you want to. I have cardinal flower in my yard. It's so pretty. It was about this tall last year and did bloom though. So another thing to consider is that root zone. We kind of talked about that with the reproductive habit. But there are fibers, there's taproots, there's corms and bulbs, and you want your planting to have a mix of those so they can all settle in. They kind of take up different spaces in the soil profile. So your taproots are going to go down really deep, your fibers are going to be a little less deep, and your corms and bulbs, think about a tulip bulb, those are going to be fairly close to the surface. So they're each occupying a different zone in your soil. You can support a lot more plants if you have a mix of those in your planting. Sorry, I talk with my hands a lot. I'm from North Dakota. Maybe South Dakota do that here. I've been here that long. All right, a couple of lessons about picking the right plant for the right space. This is my boulevard, and I have a giant ash tree out there, and eventually this ash tree is going to go away. Emerald ash borer is going to get us. But I cleared this area around this tree. I went onto my friend's property. I collected some seed. I'm not even sure what it was, and I threw it in here. Well, it was all full sun stuff. And under this tree, it was pretty well shaded. Depending on the time of day, it did eventually get some sun, but I have Canada goldenrod, which gets ridiculously tall. And it gets even taller when it grows in the shade because it's reaching for that sun. This stuff all flopped over my sidewalk. So I cut it back. And there is a management method called the Chelsea chop, which works really well on the Asteraceae family. But you want to do it in June before that flower blooms, and then they'll bloom at a lower height. So there is a management tool you can use if you put the wrong plants in the wrong place, or if you simply want something to be smaller. But anyway, lesson learned. I put the wrong species under this tree, and now I have to manage this area. And by the way, the Canada goldenrod is going away because that stuff is terrible in a native landscape in town. Grow it on your wild prairies, but don't bring it into town. There's other solidagos that do better and behave much better than Canada goldenrod. Okay, so how do we choose the right species? How do we know what we want to grow? How do we figure out what we want to grow? So there are several resources out there. SDSU actually has this on their Open Prairie. They have a native plant research site that lists all of the native plants that are native to South Dakota. It's a little hard to use, but that is a resource. There's also the common flowering plants of South Dakota that they just came out with. The SDSU Native Plant Initiative came out with this last summer. That lists, I think it's 15 of the common forms that grow in South Dakota. So that's one option. You can look at seed mixes from local nurseries. So couple of these lists are actually from Millborn Seeds near Brookings. And so they have a couple of native flower mixes, and over on the right side there, that's our native wildflower mix, and then on the left, it's just called a wildflower mix. And in that wildflower mix, they do have native, but most of the biomass in that is non-natives. So you want to be really careful when looking at, a seed mix that you can identify what's native and what's not, if you are trying to just native or garden with natives. You can go explore a local prairie. So this is one of my favorite places to go, over at the Tabor Rec area. Incredible species. I think I identified 17 species out here. And I was doing this in the fall, so I was basing it just simply on seed heads. So when I get out there next spring and throughout the summer, I should be able to identify more. But that's a great place. You can use Google Lens or one of those Plant Snap apps on your phone to help ID. And even if it's not exactly correct, it can get you close enough to the right family that you can go and find out what it really was. So that's what I like to do. Spirit Mound is also, that's a tall grass prairie that's being restored. If anybody knows Spirit Mound, hope we all do. It's pretty awesome. And then, you can also go, if you're interested, depending on your garden goals, you can select species based on what you want to support. So say you want a yard full of bees. There are different resources based on what you want to grow in your yard. So there's just in general for pollinators, is pollinator.org, the bird, Audubon has a list, Moths and Butterflies, the National Wildlife Federation, Talama has a list, and for the bees is the Xerces Society. This is all in the resource list again, so if you're frantically trying to write this down, you don't have to, and you probably can read it, because it's so small. Another option is to just, a lot of the nurseries will have curated species or plant kits. So if you want to plant something for butterflies or birds, you can go look at these plant kits. Now, some of these plants may not be native to South Dakota, our area, our region, but you can always find something in the similar family from the, say a plant kit is curated in Wisconsin and it's full of Wisconsin plants. You can look at that, get an idea of what each plants are, and then find the native equivalent for South Dakota. And that's one way to kind of work out the species you want to plant. So how do we know what's native to our region? So there are these ecoregions that were developed by the EPA, and they go beyond the plant hardiness zone for plant selection. So your plant hardiness zone basically just tells you at what temperature that plant is going to die in the winter if you plant it here. And the ecoregions, they go beyond that, and they kind of lump areas together by the type, quality, and quantity of the environmental resources. So they take into consideration soil and moisture, the general climate, all of those things. And so we want to consider our ecoregion when selecting plants. And there's different levels. There are wrong side. In Yankton, and I don't know if you can see that, we're right on the edge of two ecoregions. So we're right on the border. It's kind of hard to tell which one we're in, and y'all might not be directly from Yankton. So, but of course I'm talking about Yankton because that's where I'm from. So we're on the edge of the northern glaciated plains and the western Corn Belt plains. So in my opinion, and the way I have selected plants, or the way I approach it now is I can pick from either of these regions because I'm right on the edge. So that gives me, the way I'm making these choices, more plants to select from. There are some guides out there that are specific to level 1 ecoregions. So there's larger ecoregions, and the Great Plains runs from Canada all the way down to Texas. And so these guides are for that. So some of the plants listed might not be specific to our level 3 ecoregion, but again, you can find plants that are. So yeah. Now, to find out exactly if something is native to our region, you can look at the the Biota of North America Native Plant Atlas. And that has county, that will show you county, by county which species are native. So you can look up it, you have to know the scientific name, so that's a fun one. Yeah, I'm learning. And so you can look up by scientific name and then click on that and it'll bring up a map of which plants are native in which counties. And you can narrow it down to South Dakota or Nebraska, and it'll only show you things that are native to counties in South Dakota. So like on this map, anything that is in bright green, that means the plant is native to that county. And the dark green just indicates that that plant is native in that state somewhere. So if the state is green, that doesn't necessarily mean that that plant is native in your county. Again, it doesn't have to be native in your county, it just needs to be native to your ecoregion. So if you're a really big nerd like me, you take your ecoregion, you take a screenshot of the ecoregion, you change the opacity, you overlay that over top of the GONAP map, and then you get an idea of, okay, so this is my Western Corn Belt, and this particular, sorry, I don't remember which plant this is native in all of these counties. It's not necessarily native to Yankton, but I can grow this plant because it's native in that ecoregion. So it's a great way to select plants. And again, if this is too much information, go back to the plant list. Like I said, I totally nerd out about this stuff, so I'm really diving deep in here. A final note on choosing the right species is that if your goal is to attract native fauna, you do want to stick with straight native species and avoid non-natives and cultivars. And that doesn't mean you can't throw some zinnias and some cosmos in with your planting, because when it's getting established, makes it look a lot more interesting. You can grow whatever you want. Don't let anyone peer pressure you into thinking that you can't grow something that's not native. But if you note something on cultivars, is that some studies have shown that when we change the leaf color from red to purple, that modifies the plant chemistry. I cannot pronounce the word. Anyway, it modifies the plant chemistry so caterpillars won't eat them. So that particular plant then is not part of the food cycle, the food system in your yard. So avoid those things. I made that mistake. I have every color of heuchera in my yard that you can imagine. Oops, the only thing that eats those is slugs. And I do have 9-barks. I actually have this ginger wine 9-bark in my yard. Do I regret buying it? Absolutely. Is it gonna stay? Yeah, because I paid $40 for it. I'm not getting rid of it. Another thing to consider is that large showy blossoms have fewer fertile flowers. So this onion, the allium bulbastrum, might be really beautiful, but actually fewer of those flowers are fertile. So they're providing less nectar for our pollinators. So choose your straight native. And then also flowers with extra petals, so those double petal flowers actually have reduced nectar. You can see that the seed heads on that echinacea plant on the top actually is a lot larger than the seed head on that double flowered. So couple of things to consider. These things have been studied. There's other questions out there, on dwarf plants versus normal size plants, and we don't know a whole lot about. But one final note is that cultivars are propagated by cloning, so there's no genetic diversity. So they lack the ability to adapt to a site. So things are changing in this world, whether we like it or not. And cultivars can't, in order to evolve, they have to be selected by a plant breeder. So natives, they just adapt because that's what they've been doing for thousands of years. All right, we're going to talk a little bit about garden design. You want to diversify your plantings. You want to have forbs and grasses in your planting. Prairie plants evolve with competition. If something's that can happen if they don't have competition is if they'll grow too tall, flop over. Something might become aggressive and take over your plantings. So you want to have a mix and you want to have a nice dense planting. This isn't put a flower here, mulch around it, put a flower here, put mulch around it. This is a different type of gardening, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. You want to have things that are blooming at different times of the year. So you want to make sure you have things that are blooming in the spring for those early emerging insects. And you want to definitely make sure you have late successional plants, so the things that are migrating through have food as well. Throw in some keystone species. Those are the ones that support the highest number of our insects and pollinators. And also include things that will have winter interest. Native gardens are still fascinating because they have interest all year long, and they serve different purposes all year long. So in the winter, they feed birds, they'll seed heads and berries to feed birds, and they also provide shelter for them. So, okay, this is where we'll talk about the structure of your native garden. So your native garden should have three things: the structural layer, your architectural layer, which they don't even have to be plants, but they can be really tall native plants that have an interesting seed head, or tree, or shrub, or a bench, or a sculpture, or bird bath. So just some elements, different elements in there. And then your seasonal theme layer is essentially all of those flowering forbs that you're going to choose for each season. And then finally, you're going to have a ground cover layer. And what that ground cover layer does, it serves as your mulch for conserving water and also providing for weed suppression. So, any questions on that or anything I've said so far? Am I overwhelming you? The flower. Anything that's not a grass and not a shrub, basically. I'm going to skip that one. So a lot of people think that native gardens are weedy and out of control and they look crazy. They can be. I personally like that look. I would much rather see a prairie than a field of grass, unless it's for baseball. But there are things you can do to create a sense of order in your garden. I took this out of a guide from Minnesota, and if there's one resource you look at from today, it needs to be this one from the state of Minnesota. It's on the sheet. Anyway, you want to use cues to care in your garden. You want to create borders around those native gardens. You want to make it look like it has an orderly framework, so you can use rock to create a border. You can use mowed paths to create borders. Add those architectural features, which are also part of your design, and then include signs that say this is a native planting, this is a pollinator planting, and that might spark people to ask you questions about what you're up to. That's great, because educating your neighbors is always good. But there are ways to, keep your garden so it looks like a garden and it is intentional. So when I first started, I didn't design anything. I created this short grass prairie and just threw some seeds out and said, well, we'll see what happens. And as I've learned more, I've learned that it is actually important to kind of have a design or a plan going into it, because things can get messy, or you can do things wrong. I did a lot of things wrong, probably still doing a lot of things wrong, but I'm trying. So I did actually end up working with a landscape architect to design my front yard garden, just because it's my front yard. I didn't want it to look like a messy jungle like my backyard, which I love it. I love my backyard. But so I learned a lot from her, and so I took this design is from my yard, and then so I took the ideas from that, and I actually, for my boulevard, I drew out these blobs and swaths of plants and what was planted there, and I listed all my species. So, you know, try to put a plan together if you can. This is from a YouTube video that I watched from Grown Native from the state of Missouri, and what they suggested is taking a picture of your site, changing the opacity of it, and then drawing on top of that. So if you have some sort of, you can print it off and use colored pencils and draw on it. So I thought that was a really great idea. And then you can just draw circles and have lists, and there's lots of websites out there that actually do provide garden plans. You can go find one of those garden plans, and if it doesn't fit perfectly into the area you're trying to grow in, you can adjust it. And then of course, you know, the Grow Native plant has a lot of great plans on it, but they're Missouri plants. So you have to take that plant list and adapt it to our area here. But if you're looking for inspiration or something to guide you. Okay, moving on to sourcing your plants. So we don't have a whole lot of sources in South Dakota itself. I know at Norm's greenhouse, I found a couple of things. I know you can get butterfly, milkweed, at the local nursery here, but we don't have a whole lot of options. But SDSU, Native Plants Initiative, has a plant sale. They have plant sales in different places. We could potentially get them to come to Yankton if we wanted them to, if we asked. The West Hills Wild One chapter, so I belong to that group, and they have plant sales. They're out of Sioux City, Iowa, and I've gotten a lot of great plants from them. And then hopefully the Missouri Valley Master Gardeners will be selling native plants at our lawn garden tour on July 8th this summer. And you're thinking, July is too late to plant. Well, we're talking natives, you can still plant them in July. I planted stuff in August. I had to water a lot, but it's still possible. So those are a couple of sources, but we also have, you know, regional suppliers, and Wild Ones have a list on their website. Minnesota DNR has a list on their website. And then you can always Google. Google searches do usually end up giving you more conventional nurseries, but the Wild Ones in the Minnesota list are really good. So yeah, I bought plants from a million different nurseries. I went on a road trip this summer and filled up the back of the sewer. I hit up 3 different plant sales, well, 2 nurseries and the FCSU initiated or Native Plant Initiative plant sale at Prairie Gardens. So filled up my car, brought all the plants home. So now you can also source your own seed. You can go out to a prairie and collect it, go to a friend's house and collect it, but you want to make sure that you always have permission. Don't just go out to some prairie that you don't know who owns it and collect seed. And there's a great resource from the Xerxes Society about collecting your own wildflower seeds, cleaning them, storing them. So, and then once you collect your own seeds, you can grow them yourself. And you can grow those indoors if you have a greenhouse. You're lucky. You can grow them in there. There's a winter method, so you can grow them outdoors. There's a Joe Gardner podcast that you could listen to where they just throw the stuff, throw their seeds in pots, put it outside for the winter, put some hardware cloth over it so squirrels and birds can't get into it, and they just let it grow. And what I'll be talking about here in a few minutes is the winter sowing method, where you actually use milk jugs that kind of act like mini greenhouses and you grow outside. We're going to skip that right now, and we're going to go to installing that native plant landscape. So we have our plants now, we grew them all ourselves, and we have milk jugs in the yard. Me and Diana do. So we've got our plants. There's some great guides out there. Again, that resource from the state of Minnesota. They have a program called Lawns to Lagoons. If you Google that, you will find this resource. I could have just opened this pamphlet and went through it today. I should have actually, probably be more focused. But that's a good resource. And then the Xerxes Society also has a good resource on the organic site preparation. So a couple of the things that I did in my yard is I actually removed the turf by hand or sod cutter. Again, I'm a glutton for punishment. Scraping out sod with a shovel, not really fun. It's doable if you have a really small area. I wouldn't recommend it for entire lawns. So then I took all that sod that I dug out and I used it to smother the shade garden under my maple tree. I put cardboard down, and then I threw that sod over top of it, and then several months later, pulled it all up, moved it to a different area to smother, and then I started planting under my tree. And then there's also the herbicide method, and sometimes you just have to cave. I don't like using herbicide. I avoid it as much as I possibly can, but at some point, you can only scrape so much sod out with the shovel. And you can rent a sod cutter. I've actually done that. Clark's has them. That's another possibility. And then there's other things like solarization that can be done in those guides. That Minnesota guide and the Xerxes guide talks about those things. So we've got our side crops, and now we need to plant it. So you have some options. You can use large potted plants, but nobody can afford that many potted plants. So I would recommend plugs or seeds. And there's advantages and disadvantages to both. And this is pulled out of that Xerxes Society guide. And you can't read it, so I'll read it to you. I mean, seeds are going to be way less expensive than buying plugs. But plugs can be reasonable if you can find them for about $3, $3.50, depending on the nursery. You're going to need to do more weed control if you plant from seeds. So once your planting grows up to about 8 inches, your annual weeds have grown up that high and they have seed heads on them, you want to cut that down to prevent those seeds from maturing and then growing more weeds in that area. So in a transplanted area, you're just going to have to go through the hand pick. So there's that mowing piece, but weed control is always the thing, no matter what kind of garden you're planting. They're slower, if you plant from seed, they're slower to bloom. It'll take longer for that site to get established. So there's a saying in native planting, or planting with natives, sleep, creep, leap. In the first year when you plant something that's going to sleep, it's going to spend much of its energy putting roots into the ground, getting itself established. The next year, it's going to grow up a little bit bigger. It's not going to be full grown yet. The third year, it's going to leaf, it's going to flower, it's going to be, its mature size. So no matter how you start a native garden, it's going to take some time for it to get established. Another thing about seeding is you want to be wise about when you're actually planting. So I have a short grass prairie in my yard in one spot, and that was the place that I went and checked out some seeds and said, hey, let's see what happens. Well, I planted it in May. And the problem with that is most native seeds require stratification in order to grow. So they need something to break dormancy. And so by planting in May, those seeds didn't get that stratification. And most of what grew were things, flowers that didn't need stratification and grasses. So it was mostly grasses. Now I am working on getting this in the second year, some things have come, different things have come up, and I am working on adding some forbs into that. But plant your stuff in the fall. And also a good way to do it is planting in really late fall or early winter right before snow falls. So that snow is on top of those plants, or on top of those seeds, protecting them from the birds, and they can help work them into the soil better. Or you can do like Marlos was going to do, and we'll stomp them into the snow, which is, they call it snow sowing. So we did as the thing. So yeah, when you're planting seeds, you just have to do it in the right time. When you're planting seeds, you have less control over where things are going to grow, unless you're going to have individual, things of seeds and sprinkle things here and sprinkle things here. You're not going to have much control over where things are growing. So if you want a more curated look, opt for plugs. Installing seeds is a lot easier. Going like this, just getting down on the ground, digging 100 holes and putting 100 plugs in. It's a lot of work, but I'm punishment, so I like to do that. Seeding is suitable for small and large areas, and plugs are probably more suitable just to small areas. And from seed, you don't have to water a whole lot. I'd say, especially if you're doing the winter, the snow sowing, you don't have to water them at all and just come up in the spring. But for planting plugs, you're going to want to water them at least for the first 2 weeks, and then in drought, you're going to want to keep them watered. Here's just a picture of an area that I planted in plugs, and then the plug area, you do need to mulch it, especially if you're not planting your ground cover layer right away. And I didn't, because I was planting things so late into the summer that I didn't get my ground cover my grass layer planted, so I had to keep everything mulched. So that was kind of a pain, and I was finding everything I possibly could. I didn't want to buy mulch. I was cutting up dill from the garden and throwing that in there. So straw, I was just using whatever I could get my hands on. And you can use leaf mold, which is really great. It's basically, it's not quite compost yet, but it's broken down leaves. So, and now that you have your garden established, what do we do with it? Well, remember I said low maintenance, not no maintenance. So you're gonna have to do some things, but it's not gonna be as intense as mowing your lawn twice a week. And in May, you're gonna wanna do garden cleanup. And you wanna wait till the temperatures are consistently 50 degrees during the day, because that's when our nesting hibernating insects are starting to emerge and their eggs are hatching. So we wanna leave those leaves in place until that happens. You wanna remove excess duff from prairie areas. So say you have a shade garden, you can leave all your leaves on that, but you have a prairie garden, you wanna remove as much excess stuff as you can. And you wanna weed whack it or weed whip it down to about 8 inches. If we could burn in town, that would be awesome, but we can't. Burning is probably the best thing you can do for your prairie planting, but we can't do that. So this kind of mimics that. So then in early summer, you want to infill with new plants. So if something does die off or you have a hole you didn't fill the year before, you want to put new plants in. Some plants may need to be divided. Those things that are corms or bulbs eventually will need to be divided, just like any corm or bulb. And then if you've got, seedlings that are coming up and you don't want them there, you can relocate them. You can give them to your friends. And so that's really summer. June through September, you're just gonna keep things weeded. Water if you have to, if it's a drought, and enjoy your garden. And then in late fall, you're gonna leave your leaves. This is important for the insects that are laying their eggs, and that will overwinter here, and we want them to come back the next year. So if you have to, just because of the nature of your site, cut them back to 12 inches tall, if you can leave them standing that tall. But I like everything standing. Well, I'm buried under 3 feet of snow. So not even the birds have seed heads to eat. And then winter, you're just gonna watch the wildlife. We're utilizing your garden. So this is what's gonna happen to you. Yeah. So that's kind of the end of the formal talk. We're gonna go back and talk about winter sowing. And this is less read my slides and more this stuff. So anybody know about winter sowing? Diane does, she was in my garage. So it's a concept that was invented by Trudy Davidoff out of New Jersey or New York, Long Island maybe. And she came up with this because she was looking for a cheap method to grow her own plants, because going to the nursery is really expensive. And so she came up with winter sowing. Basically what you want to do is take any container, let's see, I have any container, you can do all kinds of different things. I use whatever I can get my hands on, actually with dumpster diving at the transfer station today, because I don't have milk jugs at home. But they've got buckets with cups in them. They've got these big plastic containers, salad containers. Anything that you can put a cover on can be used. I prefer the milk jug because I think it just makes a nice greenhouse effect. But I do have some totes at home filled with pots. You want to make sure you put drainage holes in the bottom. And if you're using something like this, you want to make sure you leave the cap off. If you're covering with plastic, you want to make sure there's holes in the plastic so that moisture can get in. I use a drill to create my hole, but people use soldering iron. I read one post that the lady heated up a knife and stabbed her jug. Maybe that was cathartic. I don't know. Just any way you can make holes. The number doesn't matter, just as long as it's draining. You want to cut, if you're using milk jugs, you want to cut them in half. And I use a box cutter to start and use the scissors to cut the rest of the way around, because I'm terrible at cutting straight with a box cutter. You're going to fill it with your soil, and you want your soil to be relatively moist. You make a ball out of it in your fist, and if it stays together, then that's moist enough. And then, especially with native wildflower seeds, you want to be pretty generous with the number of seeds you're putting in this container. You can come look at this after. But These seeds were collected in the wild. I have no idea what the germination rate is on them. Hopefully they collected them at the right time, but overseed, especially if you're using self-collected seeds. If you're buying from a nursery, they probably have good germination rates, but otherwise overseed. And then you're gonna sprinkle, I like to sprinkle dry soil over the top and then water the container again and make sure it's draining well. And then you're gonna tape it up like this, and you're gonna set it outside. You're gonna set it and forget it, kind of. Last winter was awful, and I had over 120 milk jugs and 7 or 8 flats of plants out in my yard. I had to water those things. That was annoying. This winter, nothing. I haven't had to do anything. Put them in a snow pile and call it good. So there are some things you have to do, you know, with your jugs, and one is making sure that they are watered. Because if those seeds don't get that cold, moist time that they need, then they're not going to germinate. So then what do you do once the seeds germinate? Well, it all depends on the weather. If it's dry, you water. If it's hot, you want to move to partial shade. If it's really hot, you want to move to partial shade and open your containers, but then close them again at night if it's going to be below freezing. And if it's rainy, you want to make sure your containers are draining. So if it's really wet out there, you want to make sure they're not sitting in a puddle, because that's not good for them as well. And then when it comes time to planting, I'm not sure. Oh yeah, I did. When it comes time to planting your seedlings, so you're thinking, okay, I have this block of plants. These things are tough. They grew outside. They're going to start germinating maybe on April 1st, I think is when I had my first ones germinating last year. So they're used to the elements. They're used to the cold. And their root systems are also really hardy. So this upper corner is the bottom of one of the chunks that I pulled out of a milk jug. You can just take those things and rip them apart, and they will survive. Plug them in the ground. I like to use, and I forgot to bring it, but those metal kitchen tongs. I mean, those work perfect for just sliding into the jug, grabbing a hunk and pulling it out, and planting it. So the Winter Sowers group has this saying called hunko seedling method, where you just plant a chunk of a hunko seeds or seedlings in the ground. And you can be more meticulous. Like, you can use this method for growing vegetables too. It works on pretty much anything except tropicals. But if you want to be more meticulous, you know, you can plant your seeds, put 9 in a jug or whatever, and then have individual plants if you want to do it that way. So with that, we only have 10 minutes left for questions because I talked too much. So questions? Was that too much?
Yeah, is this the time to do these jugs right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. We'll label around here. So especially with native seeds, they have what's called moist stratification needs. They have germination needs, and your cold moist stratification can be a number of days. So this particular plant, which is Rotibita columnifera Mexican hat, requires 30 days of cold moist stratification. You can do this inside. You can bake this. So like last summer, I forced germination by putting them on paper towels and putting them in the fridge. But the winter sowing method, so easy. You just put it outside, and then you don't have to think about it. And so there's plenty of time to get C60 and C30 plants done. Wouldn't recommend the 90. I think it might be too late for those. But anything that are 30, 60, there's still plenty of time for that.
What's your potting mix?
I use, what do we use, Diana? Pro-mix. You want to use a pretty good quality soil. Don't go buy stuff from the dollar store. Don't use moisture control because, well, last year moisture control probably would have been nice because it was so dry. This year, not so much, because you don't want these containers soggy. And when you get a lot of moisture, that's what will happen. So I choose Pro-Mix. There are other quality mixes out there, but something that's nice, well draining, fluffy, not full of sticks.
Professional Pro-Mix.
Menard. That's not a plug for Menard.
It's frozen right now.
Is it? Have it in the store?
It is there.
The big bale. I'm gonna order it.
Frozen solid.
Heated garage.
Yeah, that's what it
Or you drag it down to your basement.
I collected some seeds last fall and then seed heads, just on a hike or a hunt. I can't remember which, but never got to them. So they've been in a unheated garage all winter. They should be good to go, right?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I mean, and there's still time, so you can throw them in a milk jug and see what happens.
I've been saving my milk.
Okay.
Carl, as you know, because you, Gloria, and I did a little workshop on Homegrown National Park, but just a comment that others haven't, and you mentioned this, but it's so worth looking at their website because it's, as you mentioned, such a wealth of information. And for us, no matter if we just have a few plots of native plants or have more land to work with like you do, or even more, you can go on the map and you can participate in what is, by a lot of ecologists thinking, it's the largest biodiversity offering for the United States that's probably been ever undertaken. So you can put your few feet or your few square yards, whatever you have, and be on this map and join. I don't think there's like 30,000 people now participating, something like that. Coral, you know more about that, but you've enjoyed using that?
Yeah, there's tremendous resources on this page. When we gave the talk last time, somebody asked, well, what do you get out of this? Well, you're on the map. You're showing people that you're doing this. There's lots of resources on this page, but beyond that, I mean, you're showing that you're part of this community. I'm one of the three. Jim and Gloria are two of the three. You're probably one of the three. I think I'm three of the three. I think there were two. So, are any of you the other one? Do you know who the other ones are? Yeah, Homegrown National Park. Pollinator Pathways is another one that's an East Coast thing, but you can create a pathway in our state, something I'd love to do here. And then National Wildlife Federation actually has a certification as well. Theirs is a little more stringent. You can't just go throw yourself on a map. You have to meet certain requirements, but there are other ways you can put it out there that you're doing this in your yard.
One of the resources I use on big things, farms, ranches, is Conservation Blueprint. And it's really good for if you have larger parcels and you want to do some restoration or protection. They go into everything from prescribed burning to weed, pest control, seed collection, etc. I think they have a lot of grants to help people. That's on big parcels.
What's it called?
Conservation Blueprint.
I don't like that term. But I'm a resource guide. Thanks.
And I studied island ecology. I'm a graduate from University of Hawaii and went on as a biologist, but I never really used that. But this is exactly these small parcels. You're surrounded in this area is agriculture. So your little backyard is really important. It makes that connectivity for migrating species. You're turning that in there and providing that space, and you may see things year after year come through. But you are surrounded by a sea of agriculture here, and these native plants and those little parcels can be very, very important.
The pollinator pathways is actually really interesting because what they did was they had a town where they had some parks and they had some native plantings, and they made a pathway through this town of native plants. So they worked with the homeowners and the city to get these these native plantings put throughout the city so that the insects or the pollinators had a pathway through town because, a certain pollinator can only fly so far. And so this pathway allowed all of these different habitats to be connected within a distance that these species could easily travel to. So,
One thing I just want to mention too, we have some opportunities in Yankton with the all Broca Trail and some places that are owned by the city. If we could all kind of try to influence our local leaders to buy into this and capitalize on that.
Excellent.
so the Missouri Valley Master Gardeners Group has started a native plant committee, and we don't know what our mission is yet. It was my idea. And so we hope to work on some projects like that.
There's gonna be some construction on Highway 81 in the next few years to make it a 4-lane up there for about 5 miles, and we're on there. And I read in another state, when they redid the ditches, some states put in just wildflowers. So I said to the state of South Dakota, do it in front of when you do ours, if there's extra work, I'll do it, and that kind of stuff. And they weren't interested in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that would be neat, don't you think, if that 5 miles got committed to wildflowers, you know? I don't know if like all the crops get, you know, there's, all the chemicals they put on the crops would just mess it up anyway, I don't know, but, you know, for the pollinators, but I just thought that that would be neat if we had a 5 mile of, well, and all I wanted was my road. I wouldn't take care of all 5 miles, I'd take care of my,
Yeah.
but they were not interested.
When I lived in Texas, because I was involved with a lot of things out there, one of the studies that we had done was the pollinator death rate along those highways, though, with the wildflowers. It was tremendous, and we were harming the species instead of helping the species.
So what do you think?
It was not a good idea. Yeah. So, just food for thought.
So maybe they are safer in town.
Well, if we get electric cars, that'll help.
The speed of the car.
Yeah. But then on your windshield. Yeah.
Well, if anyone has any follow-up questions, you can email the Missouri Valley Master Gardener email, and they can pass those on to me. Is that in one of our brochures? And as a volunteer, it is my duty to educate
Yes,
people.
there is.
So if you have questions, if you want help figuring out what to do in your yard, I can certainly volunteer, offer myself up for that. I'm helping Diana.
Yeah. Get started.
Yeah.
I live in West Yankton, right along the bluffs. And those bluffs have a lot of prairie grass, I would imagine. Could I take some of the seeds off of that and try to start it in my yard?
I mean, is it your property?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, do whatever you want.
Okay. From those prairie grasses.
Yes, yes. And there's a book back there. It's about identifying seed heads. So, there's lots of resources to help you identify which they are, but yeah, I have a friend who has a CRP planting, and it's got all kinds of things in there, and I go out and pick stuff.
I have 50 turkeys stomping through my yard twice a day.
And the turkeys aren't helping you plant
They
things?
eat every seed I
Yeah.
put down.
Yeah, another source for native plant seed is, so the Northwest Iowa Sierra Club group and the Lust Hills Wildland group. Talk about Lust Hills Wildland a lot, I'm part of that too. And they've just been tremendous. So if you want to be even more obsessed about native plants, join that club. But they have actually offered a couple of opportunities to go out and collect seed on other members' prairies. And that's actually the way I got some of the seeds for our library, for the seed library, is collected seeds from their prairies. So those are curated events through those clubs. But that's one way to get seeds too, if you don't have access to a wild prairie.
Yeah.
And just to note, you cannot collect that spear mound. Just want to throw that out there. I'm on the board now, so.
Can you talk about the?
Yeah,
seeds that you brought?
Oh, yes. So though I brought a bunch of seeds to add to the library, but I also just brought some freebies for today. If you want to grab them, they're not well labeled. So, and I did this on purpose because you need to go home and research these. Right? You'll learn how to research your plants. Just kidding, I didn't have time to label. And so, one of the species is Cytostrama, which is, would be considered part of your ground cover or matrix layer. So that would be a base plant. It's about a 2 foot tall, it gets about a 2 foot tall seed head, but its basal leaves are only about a foot tall. I have this in my short grass prairie, and that's where most of this came from. There's Retibita columnifera, the long-headed coneflower. So it's a yellow coneflower that gets this long, skinny seed head. It grows to about 3 feet tall. That is very prolific. So there's so much of the seed because I had to clear it out of my planting because I didn't want it to self-seed anymore. So that's a really pretty one. That's also a C30, so there's plenty of time to get it stratified. And then oh my gosh, I'm gonna destroy this name. I'm not even gonna try. Anisissa. There's a native version of this. You should all be growing this instead of whatever else you have in your yard. This is a C30D. D just means you want surface sowing. So this is a purple flower. Pollinators love it. It smells amazing. Makes great tea. So then I also have Carex gramoire, so plains oval sedge, and this would be another species that would be part of your ground cover or matrix layer. This is a C60, so you want to plant it if you want to do a winter sowing with it. You want to get it in the ground sooner rather than later. But sedges are also a great part of that matrix layer, and this is one of the easier ones to grow. Lots of sedges are really hard to start yourself by seed. So, and then I think there's probably 40 species, no, 24 species, 25, 26 new species of native plants that we have added to our library or are adding to our library. And they actually have labels and descriptions on them. So you can read and learn about those plants. But I can stick around if you want to ask me questions about that.
I have common milkweed, and I didn't notice much of any kind of insects on them. Someone said that you had to have the swamp milkweed. Is that? No.
No. So it takes some time, so I don't know how long you've had it, but it'll take a minute for the things to find it. I have a garden that is just milkweeds. And first year, not much was happening with it. Second year, it was covered in milkweed beetles. It was producing monarchs. There were caterpillars in there. So it took a little bit of time. And then the whole garden got eaten last year, which is incredible. It was a good thing.
Oh, yeah.
I wanted it to get eaten. That was the point of it. So it could take some time, but common milkweed is the preferred. Swamp milkweed is pretty high up there, but common is probably the most preferred. And the SDSU Native Plant Initiative, actually, there's a woman doing research on monarchs. She actually gave, and you have those online.
They just had a couple of sessions.
Yeah, I don't know if they have those online, but her research is kind of will hopefully show preference for them.
Also, I have a Rhododendron lanceolata. I'm sure that's not, does that have any native tendencies?
Lanceolata?
Lanceolata. It's real tall and it gets a lot of insect on it. I didn't know if that was something I'd have to take out because I took out everything last fall that was.
Oh, so you started already?
Yeah, that was not like that. So, but I had those spots in the corners and.
Okay.
But how do I determine whether that's okay to keep?
So there is a native Coreopsis lanceolata, if I'm saying that right. You may have gotten a cultivar from a nursery. I don't know where that plant was sourced from, but there is a native. And if it's growing 5 feet tall, it could be because your site conditions are really great. So it could be a native. You're going to want to look at an actual plant ID book to figure out whether or not that is native, or try to figure out where that plant originated from. And again, you can have cultivars in your yard. That one, Annie White's research, which is on the research list, showed that, there was preference for natives, but they were still using these cultivars. So they still do have use for native fauna. They just might not be as good. So you can leave it in there.
Yeah, that's right.
It might be okay.
No, so.
Anyone wanting seeds for millborn and groupings, the prime time for burning is April. before you get the seeds down and everything, so I remember that with a conversation on some of the stuff I was looking at for the park.
Okay, yeah, if you're lucky enough to have a property and be able to plant an entire prairie, Millboard is a South Dakota-based company for seeds.
I was curious what people are using for field guides for wildflowers in this area. I'm a biologist, but as a botanist, call it BV, a big picture botanist, forest, wetland, grassland. My colleagues would call me a bad botanist. But I was just wondering, what people are using here, because I'm out hiking and I see something and sometimes I have trouble identifying what it is.
Yeah, and I'm using the National Wildlife Federation field guide to Western. No, it's not. It's yellow.
I was just curious.
And a lot of what I'm using are these, pretty picture books. When I'm saying I'm identifying these plants, I'm not getting down to look at the number of stripes and leaves. I'm not even using the correct botanical words, but I'm not getting that crazy about the ID. But yeah, I use the National Wildlife Federation field guide.
Thank you.
Or I think like on your phone, what device or what app? I use iNaturalist, but it's not perfect. Other
Plants, I have like 5 of them. So Plant Snap, iNaturalist, Google Lens, the Benjamin Voigt, one of the people I follow, and I have his books. He suggests Google Lens, and he says it works 50% of the time. So
those are all free sites.
yeah, those are all free. There's paid subscriptions. You can get fancy about it. Okay, we're definitely over time, or maybe we're not, I don't know.